So right here, video protagonist only makes sense to talk about video game antagonists, the opponents the player is generally pitted against, whether it be an opponent that's made clear up front or is revealed later, with there also being certain kind of things to do with the narrative that can also make people upset with how an antagonist is handled. Since earlier in the protagonist video I mentioned Mario and Link, makes sense for this one to start with Ganondorf, or Ganon from Legend of Zelda series, the big bad of not the entire franchise, but a good chunk of it when it comes to these Zelda games, being the literal king of evil and having a Triforce of Power, wanting to dominate all of Hyrule. And this is straight to the point what the villain is. He is evil, and he is always gonna be evil because literally his title. I mentioned that part because there are some people, at least in recent talks I've seen, who wish they had more going on with Ganondorf, and it's like, King of Evil, it's in his title, kind of thing. And the fact of, in the entries he's in, he's always depicted as being ruthless and even uncaring to his own people, the Gerudo, even to the point where, if you're playing Breath of the Wild of the Kingdom games, the Gerudos don't like him, kind of thing. So it's one of those things where that's his role in the narrative, and there are some people who want to either give him more, which I don't know what more you get for being a big bad, or the idea that they want him to be somewhat sympathetic with the situation of Gerudos being in the desert, but that's people thinking being in the desert means life has to suck when it doesn't, or people who think him wanting to rule Hyrule is some noble goal of wanting to help his people, when even in games where he's on the winning side, he still does nothing for his own people at all. Like, there's a villain who's gonna be a villain and is straight up just uncaring to anyone else's plight than his own, even when it comes to his own people. Bowser from the Mario series, another simple villain who, when it comes to main Mario games, either A, wants to kidnap Princess Peach, or B, conquer a kingdom, whether it be the Mushroom Kingdom or a different one, doesn't really matter. With this whole entire thing of, when it comes to, like I said, main games, pretty simple goal, pretty simple thing he wants to do. Not much needs to be said, it's like Mario, only the actions and the way he does things that makes him an entertaining villain to go against. That is why, thanks to the power of spin-offs, you do get a bit more with Bowser, especially in the RPG games where there are opportunities to have other characters be the villain. And if Bowser's not the villain, well then, what is Bowser doing? With my favorite portrayal being Mario RPG being, if Bowser's not the villain, instead you have the Smithy Gang, well, now Bowser has to reluctantly work with Mario, or as the game phrases it, you join Bowser's Koopa army, even though that's totally not what's happening, but it's the whole entire idea of what comes to other games being, okay, what if Bowser's not the main villain, or what if he still schemes and tries to take the villain role at the last second, depending on some of the RPG games like Partners in Time. Certain aspects like that make the dynamic more interesting, but like I said, for the main games what people mostly play with, he is simple in what he wants. He's just entertaining with his simplicity. Since I mentioned the idea in the cutscenes video, I have to also mention villains that only exist within a cutscene. I already mentioned how having a major character in a game only being a cutscene means they might as well not exist to the player, and there are some video game villains that fall into that criteria, which once again, depending on who you ask, many people still love those villains for what they do for the game story, but also can feel disappointed if you don't get a certain interactability. And then there are some villains who aren't built for that kind of interactability whatsoever, so trying to squeeze in a boss fight with them or some kind ends up not exactly working out. Two that come to mind is Andrew Ryan from BioShock 1, a beloved video game villain who does a lot for the story of BioShock 1 since he effectively created Rapture and is your main target for throughout most of the game, with Atlas helping you out in this pursuit to stop Andrew Ryan. or well, technically you're helping Atlas kind of thing, since he's the one giving you orders. So kind of thing where you have this setup of these two people working together to stop Andrew Ryan, and it wouldn't make sense for Andrew Ryan to actually have a fight of some kind, so he only actually exists within the cutscenes when it comes to the player getting to interact with Andrew Ryan, which for a video game is disappointing. Then again, Bioshock 1's final boss sucks, so maybe it's for the better. And then one that still gets flack for trying to turn into a boss fight is easily Batman Arkham Asylum with the Joker, where they try to squeeze in a boss fight with the Joker because we had a big finale. Joker's the main villain of this video game. We need something for him to do. And what they came up with is something that's still laughed at, criticized to this day, because of the case of this is here for the gameplay, everything. It's not even a good fight. That's the worst part. But it's also because it feels like something the character wouldn't do, which is also a balance that comes to video games. Sometimes a villain isn't built for inclusion in gameplay, which then has to do with the problem of where you're still making a video game that is an important character. So it's one of those cases of you can see why Andrew Ryan wouldn't have a fight and why people thought Joker probably shouldn't at least have a fight like this. But with those two examples, those are also villains who are set up early on. They are set up so you know what the target is and who to put your emotions towards and being angry about, which some people do like when it comes to a narrative, knowing exactly who the target is immediately, which is why there are some people who don't like it if a game takes a while to actually reveal who the villain is. Deadly Premonition is a murder mystery game, and in that game, you are investigating the Raincoat Killer when it comes to the crime spree going on. However, despite the fact that you're trying to figure out who they are and bring them to justice, you still encounter the Raincoat Killer multiple times and actually have to avoid him, because turns out being in a room with a guy who can casually swing around a large axe isn't exactly the most easiest thing for an FBI like Francis George Morgan to deal with. So it's more about trying to uncover who they are rather than just immediately confronting them. While fighting games aren't exactly sought after for their writing usually, they still need some central villain that the characters have one reason or another to go against, especially if they're going to be the final opponent for an arcade mode, whether it be something like, oh, Street Fighter 6's JP, who also does get the benefit of an entire story mode with the World Tour mode going on. We're like, hey, we're going to establish this new villain, just ignore they brought back M. Bison, shh, we can talk about that. And it's one to go of how does he do things. Oh, he's more about manipulation, he's more about scheming and doing his whole entire plans. Where our creative character is all about trying to pursue what does strength mean, and ends up fighting about all the stuff JP is doing and wanting to go after him. And while I won't spoil the conclusion to World Tour, it actually made me like JP way more, to the point where I'm surprised JP isn't a more light villain, at least from what I've seen, where people seem to just treat him as he's entertaining to play as, but he just kind of exists for some people. But when it comes to what World Tour's ending manages to do with him, it's a case of, damn. That's just also fun. I also see people complain that World Tour mode's ending is bad. It's like, it's not badly written, it's just not necessarily a good outcome. There's some thing where, depending on the game, people don't like it if a game spends most of its time on one villain, only to then have another villain show up afterwards, whether or not the villain has plenty of time to really work with. I say this because there are entries like, let's say, Final Fantasy IV, where people say Golbez is the villain of Final Fantasy IV. There's someone else other than Golbez, but Golbez is the one they focused on when it comes to who is the main villain, who is the face of the antagonist side of the game. But then there's someone else, like Resident Evil 4, where Sadler is the big bad. People acknowledge Sadler is the villain. The enemies praise Lord Sadler, but Salazar is the one you spend way more time with, even though he's the lackey. But there are people who think, nah, Sadler's still the villain, even if he gets less screen time than Salazar, especially in the Resident Evil 4 remake, where in that one, Sadler gets even less screen time compared to the original. But people still acknowledge Sadler is the villain of that game, and not Salazar. But with something else, like let's say, if I've seen generally RPGs, if they spend a long time with one villain, they will focus all their attention onto that one villain, even if other villains end up being in the game. Speaking of Final Fantasy villains, people often try to cite some of the most best Final Fantasy villains, and yet Emperor Mateus, Final Fantasy II, generally makes that list. People complain that he's quote-unquote too one-note, or that he doesn't have enough screen time. One, there's Final Fantasy. Saying a character doesn't have enough screen time for a villain is like so many characters, actually. They're more having their influence being shown to the player rather than needing them to walk on screen and tell the player how evil they are. And two, Emperor Mateus is a villain that's so evil, even his good half, even all the good nature in this man's body is still evil. Like, you can't get more of a character you want to root for their failure more than Mateus with how he's written. He's so evil that even his actions in the world aren't enough to show how bad he is. Even his light half is basically, I'm still evil, but I'm very polite about it. I'm very kind about it, you know, but I still dick. Hell, Mateus is so evil, he plots to try and take over the Cityverse as well when it comes to the war between Cosmos and Chaos. This man is so evil, he shows up in Stranger of Paradise wanting to rule Jack's world as well with the power of the crystal. This man is so evil, he goes to other games with plans of world domination. The cool aspect about video games is also the ability to play as the villains. I already mentioned JP in Street Fighter 6, so of course being a fighting game, you get to play as JP himself. But you also have adaptations of other properties, like the Spider-Man 1 movie game, where one of the cool bonuses is the ability to play as Green Goblin. Even though in the context of this game, the Green Goblin you're playing as is actually Harry Osborn in the suit and not Norman, but it is still a cool thing to have another playable character and being the game's villain, even if it's not the villain of the game. Although this was a mode that Sam Raimi did not like because he felt like being able to play as the villain meant you were glorifying the villain, with one of the requirements for the Spider-Man 2 video game being that in no way, shape, or form would you be allowed to play as Doc Ock, which is disappointing to find out that, one, that meant in a world there was a possibility that Doc Ock could have been playable in the Spider-Man 2 movie game, but also the fact of the idea that Sam Raimi felt it was because playing as a villain means you are glorifying them. While I think the Sam Raimi thing is goofy, it is a thing where I mentioned in the Antagonist video that there are people who don't like the idea of playing as an antagonist or a villain character. And one interesting example will have to be Last of Us Part 2, where you have the main character of Ellie trying to go after Abby, with Abby being the antagonist for Ellie's perspective. However, you get to play as Abby, and from her perspective, the antagonists are the Seraphites, with Ellie not even really being a thought she has when it comes to an antagonist towards her, because she doesn't really have any sort of anger or animosity towards Ellie, which makes the dynamic interesting. The fact of, here's one character going after this person, and here's this person doing something else because this is their focus, and another person's like, huh? What? You? kind of situation. But there are people who didn't like playing as Abby when you spent many hours viewing Abby from Ellie's perspective of the antagonist, and now they want you to see Abby's perspective of what she's doing, what's her goals, etc., and how her goals have basically nothing to do with the stuff you did as Ellie. I already mentioned people not liking the Joker's boss fight from Batman Arkham Asylum, but people did enjoy playing as the Joker for a side mode Arkham Asylum that was originally exclusive to the PS3 version, but I believe got included in the Return to Arkham remasters. So it shows that people are willing to enjoy playing as a villain, just not if the main story itself is about the villain specifically, it seems. Interesting case of a big villain is Lavos from Chrono Trigger, where a lot of the plot of Chrono Trigger isn't trying to learn about Lavos, he's not talking to you, he's not doing much of anything, just waiting to see the point in history where Lavos is supposed to show up and essentially cause devastation to the planets. With the story, you finding people who are either trying to get rid of Lavos or trying to use Lavos in one shape or form, trying to figure out, is this where Lavos came from? Is this the origin point? Is this what happened? And what's going on? So we have all these other villains you're going up against. They still aren't the big threat you're focusing on of Lavos. There are people who are also trying to use Lavos for their own goal, or finding out what is Lavos in your pursuit and how much deeper this thing actually goes. Earlier in the video, I mentioned there are people who wanted more out of Ganondorf and possibly making him not fully evil, but still evil in the case of maybe he has some kind of point, and that is become, as I notice, more of a trend where people tend to try and view certain characters, certain villains, in a different light and see them as more of a this character was justified in their actions. And one I'll bring up, so I've already seen my people bring it up, is Logan from Fable 3, who is the brother of the protagonist of that game, being an evil tyrant and doing awful things. But it's the fact that he's doing awful things for the kingdom, so some say that means Logan was right and that he wasn't actually much of a bad person. Except for the fact that, one, you think he would have said any of this to his sibling whatsoever, who's leading an entire revolution against him, and two, no, because when me and my brother played Fable 3, we actually had so much money in that game that we didn't even need to do evil things and make sacrifices. Hell, I didn't make sacrifices just to be an evil character. My brother was able to easily make all the good choices, no sweat, and the entire moral aspect the game tried to put of sacrifices must be made. Turns out, perhaps Logan just needed to do more of the side jobs a lot more in order to get the funds, because turns out it's really easy to do that. So, no, I don't see Logan as justifying the slightest of being the villain of the game when it comes to making sacrifices, because gameplay betrays him and just makes it look as if maybe Logan just ain't doing enough. Back to using two Final Fantasy examples for this contrasting opinion, but it's a case when it comes to Final Fantasy 4 and 7. Something being the fact of, when it comes to Final Fantasy 4, you'll tend to find people harsh towards the character Kain for betraying the party. But the game makes the point that clearly someone is controlling him. Granted, they're controlling him through the actual scorn and hate he has for Cecil, so it's a case of, yeah, it's technically still the emotion came from him, not the actions, but he still wants to take responsibility for it. But there are people who still treat him purely as a villain, since he keeps betraying the party thanks to the influence of someone else. I mention this because nowadays you have Final Fantasy VII, where there are people who treat Sephiroth as just being manipulated in an innocent party to Jenova. Even though the game makes the point that Jenova's not using Sephiroth, Sephiroth is using Jenova. But people try to think that, oh, what if Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 makes it to where Jenova's the real big bad, and instead Sephiroth just a party? And I'm like, get your, and then they lived happily ever after fanfic nonsense out of here. That would be awful, and it feels like also basically just a cheap excuse. But just one of those things where there are people who will push the blame of what Sephiroth does onto Jenova, but when Final Fantasy IV makes it to a point that Kane's actions are truly his fault, suddenly, nah, Kane's awful, he's a traitor, how dare he. You know what, playing the City of Duellum, I saw someone say, you guys play Kane badly because you're bad at Kane. I play Kane badly because he's canonically a traitor. And it's like, bro, one actually has an excuse, the other one doesn't. This section will have spoilers for Persona 5, so you don't want to spoil Persona 5, you can skip to this time or get away from that, but spoilers for Persona 5. Alrighty? You cool with that? Alright? Let's go. Because of Persona 5, people will generally say that Persona 5 has 2 palaces that you go to that aren't run by villains. To which I go, no, Persona 5 has 1 palace not run by a villain, that being Futaba Sakura, whose whole entire palace is self-hatred due to her trauma, so she's not actually being antagonistic and villainous towards the party or anybody else. While she is still a hacker for justice, she's not outright evil or malicious with what she does. Sai Nijima is a villain that other fans will say is not a villain, but I heavily disagree, because even before she's revealed to be a palace ruler, she still threatens to pretty much take Sojiro to court if he doesn't hand over Wakaba's research. And no, this is not because she believes, like other people, that Sojiro is possibly abusing Futaba in some way, shape, or form. Not at all, because if she actually cared about that, she would have pursued him regardless if he handed over the research or not. Hell, Sojiro flat out believes that Sai was using Joker to prod him about Futaba in order to try and get the research easier from him. She wasn't, so she has no idea what he's talking about, but it still shows the lengths that Sai will go in order to actually improve her situation. And yes, there's a lot of stress, she's trying to do a lot of things, get a big promotion, help her sister Makoto, who she does F up and heavily insult, but she also regrets that, so I'm not gonna fully libel against her, but it is still pretty bad. There's a fact that even for the Palace Ruler reveal, she still does bad things with the game, or the fact that even how she interrogates Joker, constantly berating him. Yeah, she feels bad and is angry that the police physically abused him and used drugs, but it's just a fact that she's still slamming the table, yelling at him, demanding him to write out his accomplices, everything going on. So it's not as if, once again, she's a good person here. And since we're going by the rule of Persona 5, that also means the stuff shown in the palace and how the shadow acts is also attributed to the ruler. So with that combined, I still think Sai's a villain. Yes, she gets redeemed, but until that point, she is still a villain. A character I would consider the antagonist, but not the outright villain of the story, is Mew from the Caligula Effect, / Caligula Effect Overdose, where Mew, being a virtual idol, creates this entire false reality where people can have whatever life they choose and be as happy as possible. All she cares is that humanity is smiling, but because she herself is not human, she does not know or care about stuff such as human morality and encouraging people to do bad behavior because it makes them happy. One of the game's aspect is the fact that while she's fulfilling all these wishes of these people who just want to be happy as kind stuff, at some point, she's gonna end up fulfilling the wishes of truly despicable people, but because she can't process what they want is heinous, she's gonna do it without any actual thought towards it, and the fact that it also starts negatively impacting her, because turns out becoming a receptacle for humanity's negative emotions does horrible things to you, even if you are an AI. So it's one of those aspects where I feel like Mew is an antagonist, but not the actual big bad. Also helps that she's not the leader of the antagonist side, that being Thorn instead, who does have her own ulterior goals that she keeps away from even her own group of people. Another villain I see people try to turn into a more retroactive tragic figure is the Infinite from the game Sonic Forces, where in the game of Sonic Forces, Infinite was the ultimate mercenary, or at least that's what he called himself, but after being defeated by Shadow, strives to become stronger to where he is the sole most powerful thing in the world. Even his own theme song shows how much he believes in his own strength and believes that if it's just him facing one other individual, they will lose, with him even defeating Sonic at multiple points. It's one of those things where that's his goal, to be the best there is when it comes to being powerful after failing to be powerful against Shadow. Now, where fans try to change this is where they try to claim that Infinite's a tragic character, saying that Shadow killed Infinite's friends, that being Jackal Squad, who aren't even on screen as Sonic Forces and instead shown in a tie-in comic. But that's the thing, Shadow never actually killed Jackal Squad. Like, people claim he did because of the language saying, oh, you destroyed my squad, or Shadow annihilated the defense team, but that doesn't necessarily mean killed, especially why would Shadow kill Jackal Squad but not kill Infinite or Eggman himself? That does not add up at all. Especially if he thinks Infinite is so pathetic that after some hits, he's like, you're never worth my time. Doesn't even remember him. Maybe people, for some reason, try to treat Infinite as this tragic character, even trying to retroactively make his backstory on the scale of Shadow losing Maria, which is just, I just don't know where this mentality came from at all. Like, it doesn't make sense at all when you think about it, even for a short bit, and I don't know why people like to peddle the idea that Shadow would just pointlessly murder Jackal Squad, let their leader live, let Eggman live, and then peace out. And people try to shift the argument to, well, Shadow's killed other people. Yeah, obviously. Doesn't mean he kills Jackal Squad. One last case I'll mention of people trying to shift the blame when it comes to the villain of the game is Final Fantasy 15 with Arden, but that's specifically because people are taking the episode Arden DLC as being a canonical backstory towards the character, when it is not. It was meant to be the first part of setup towards the alternate continuity storyline that then got turned into Dawn of the Future because of the fact of the DLCs got cancelled. So no, that DLC is not his actual backstory at all. It was instead set up for a whole different storyline that only came to fruition in the form of a novel, which FF15 fans try to pretend is the canonical story when it is not. An interesting aspect when it comes to video games is also the part where you have choices, which means characters who were antagonistic could then become antagonistic towards the player in major ways. Like Devil Survivor 1 and 2 has a route system where in the finale you have to pick which path you want to go. This also means that the paths you don't pick may have those characters now be antagonistic towards you. They are now the antagonistic faction who will try to stop you. Not guaranteed, because sometimes some characters will still side with you anyway, but for the most part, characters who are fully extreme and fully in their belief cannot actually be swayed, and now they're the antagonists. You can spend the whole game with someone you were chilling with, favorite character, everything, but if you don't pick their side, well, now suddenly they're here to stop you, and they are the antagonist of your story. This is also why you have the meme thing of Fire Emblem fans saying, more years of discourse for Three Houses because of the game having the different routes, which means certain characters may be on your side and you agree with them, or may be against you and you don't agree with them, so player's perspective on who is more antagonistic in their story. So it's one entire thing of what the player chooses and how they choose to view the story of the game and how that affects who they see as the game's actual antagonists. But also the gameplay wise, where if a villain is getting hyped up by the writers, then the gameplay needs to also match with them being an intimidating threat. With some games going the route of just making the player lose a fight in order to do that, which can be effective, but if it's done way too often, then it becomes a problem. It's why I don't like Beatrix from Final Fantasy IX, because every single time you fight her, it's always a scripted loss to the point where I don't feel like I'm actually losing. It's just the story saying that I do, which is the whole problem. Or I put Final Fantasy 15 on this list, who every single time I fight him gets defeated by a giant rock. Riveting villain. Another one I see also that gets heavily disliked is Kai Lang from Mass Effect 3. Other than the fact that Kai Lang is basically there to be the video game substitute for the Elusive Man, since combating the Elusive Man is exactly the kind of thing he would do. But also the fact that Kai Lang is also kind of thing where the game wants to hype up how powerful he is in the story, but in gameplay he's a complete chump, with people being baffled the game tries to act like he has any chance against Shepard and his squad, and the fact that even no matter what, he just kind of goes down as a chump. Even better to use the Renegade prompt to fully finish him off during the final encounter with Kai Lang. Saints Row the Third tries to hype up Stag as this big new military force that's there to take out the gangs. And while some fans are already disappointed that all the gangs in Saints Row the Third all form into just one giant syndicate, so it doesn't feel like they're going to individual people, just one giant organization, Stag could have been more to break that up, especially since they're supposed to be way more destructive in their pursuit of taking out the gangs. The problem being, when it comes to the writing of Saints Row the Third, the Saints are constantly one step ahead of Stag. Sure, they get the drop on the gang once, but it's like, oh, you kidnapped Shaundi. Oh, what a shock. Totally wasn't kidnapped twice in the last game, and will get kidnapped again in Saints Row the Third. That's not an achievement, that's an expectation. But it's the fact that Cyrus Temple doesn't really get to truly shine as this more ruthless military aspect, because the whole entire thing of he has to pretty much play second fiddle to another individual, which also means he has less he can really do. Constantly complaining, he can't just use a data list, complaining that Josh Burke was made into the face of Stag with this Nightblade character, who the Saints effortlessly kidnapped to turn into a bargaining chip against Stag. Like, it just makes him so pathetic, doesn't get to do anything. And since the Save Shawnee and Viola ending is the canon one, Cyrus Temple doesn't even get to actually use the data list the game kept hyping up in canon. And if you do go that ending where you go against a data list, you beat it really easy despite how hyped up it was as a big threat. And even Cyrus's Temple actual boss fight in that ending isn't much to go off of, since he just attacks you from a Beetle. Like, it's just so baffling how the story wants to hype up them as this big new threat, but gameplay wise they can't match up, leaving Stag just completely uninteresting. And I know some may question why I'm counting Stag as a villain when they're trying to stop the gangs, but once again, the message they're going through, especially with the data list, goes so far that's a case of, yeah, you can't possibly be seen as the good guys here when it comes to this scenario, even if the Saints themselves are also terrible. But I want to add the Killers of Dead by Daylight as being a villain group that is freaking gets easily bodied by the protagonist. I know that's a multiplayer game, so it's not fair, but it's just the case that with the perks and stuff the survivors have compared to the Killers, they can just completely clown the Killers and turn them into a non-threat. Not helped by the bound to be a multiplayer game, there are just some killers in that game that just can't keep up with other killers who are able to do the job better. So when it comes to characters like Trapper, the face of Dead by Daylight, it is the fact that he can't keep up with the more recent changes and recent versions of Dead by Daylight. So yes, I will count Dead by Daylight's own original killers as occasionally being villains who get undermined by the gameplay of Dead by Daylight. Lost Judgment is a case where you have the actual villain who's the final boss of the game, but what I find weird is how people complain that the final boss of the game doesn't feel like the ultimate villain solely because people tend to like that character and agree with what they're doing, and instead claim they wish the penultimate fight with someone who's way more sadistic and cruel was the actual final boss and final encounter. And it's one of those weird things that I won't understand, the idea that the character who is being built up as the game's villain and central to the game's entire themes and story is somehow seen as less of a villain just because some people agree with their methods, even though their methods are also horrific and evil. And I don't get why people agree with them. You can like the guy. Liking the villain is good because it's gritty. You like a villain. I'm not, but saying that he was right in what he did is, I don't know about that one, Chief. Which is also another thing. Some people also just enjoy the villain since you're meant to like the characters as villains to go against, although some people really treat it as a case of liking a villain means by default you think they were right. No, you can heavily enjoy a villain, it's entertaining, doesn't mean you agree with what they were going for. That's why that's what confuses me when there are some people who do try to change the narrative of what's going on with the villain to make it seem as if they were more innocent of what's going on, which, no, that's not what you should be doing. You should enjoy the villain as they are and see how they work with the story or as opponents to go against in the gameplay as cool antagonists. Which, not exclusive to video games, is a thing I've noticed in recent years of people constantly trying to think that a story explaining how a character became a villain is the story trying to justify their actions, when no, it's just showing you what led up to this point. What led up to where they would think that everything they're doing is either in the right or that they have the right to do certain actions, where sometimes they're just so evil, just fooling themselves. Luis from Metaphor is a villain that often gets praised a lot, especially in recent years. Of the weirdest praise I've seen people saying he feels like a classic JRPG villain and not a modern JRPG villain. To which I must ask, what the hell does that even mean? But it's the fact that Luis is charismatic, is incredibly honest about what he's about and what he plans to do, and the fact that the game doesn't have to show you how strong he is, you get to see aftermath of the stuff he does, and then compare it to how the party struggles to do similar things. It's a good job of setting him up, and just emphasize that he is generally one step ahead of people, even to the point where the party can find new discoveries, and then are incredibly paranoid if Luis already knows this information or not, which brings a lot of attention. The fact of they don't know how far ahead Luis is when it comes to his goals. My issue why I don't find Luis to be a great villain is the fact that what is a good job emphasizing how powerful he is by showing you the aftermath of what he does, it's also the fact that for most of the game he's just a dude sitting in a chair issuing orders to people, not helped by the fact that his own hench people are also depicted as kind of being dumb. Like, they're not dumb characters per se, but it's the fact of this guy, I said, is brutally honest. He tells everyone what he plans to do, what he wants to do, and the character still gets surprised that he does heinous things despite telling people how he is. It's like, why are y'all so surprised by this? Even his own people get surprised at points by when Luis actually do. Yes, he told you so. What? On top of the fact that you can only have a character appear so smart when their opposition, being the party in the game, are idiots with the stuff they come up with as they think are schemes that can work without a hitch and have so many flaws that the game has to pretty much go, oh yeah, I already knew you were gonna do that. Except some people then try to go further and to say, well, obviously he just allows this or that thing to happen. And it's like, listen, you can't say a character is very smart and then try to excuse they're letting so many things happen behind the scenes, which just makes them more of an idiot than actually a mastermind. So I feel like a heavy lifting when it comes to the game's running of Luis is that I don't think he's a good villain, but he ends up looking so smart because he's kind of surrounded by idiots. A villain I've seen people wish was in the game way more than they got was Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village, with people focusing on the fact she was a face of the marketing. Well, because they don't want to spoil the other lore, so they're going to focus on the first one you go against, or people thinking she should have been also the main villain of the game, which, what? Huh? I don't get it, because I don't think she really has enough to really go that far, especially when it comes to the grand scheme of things, when it comes to the lords and why they were created the way they are and everything. It's one of those things where I just don't see the appeal, especially even in gameplay. People go, she had big presence in the gameplay, but she was a 9-foot tall stalker enemy. And not just that, a stalker enemy you can't even hurt, which to me makes her the worst kind of stalker enemy, because at that point, there's no interaction. You just quietly walk away from her because she's weirdly not fast enough to actually chase Ethan. So it's one of those things where I just don't see the appeal of making her more of a villain than she got. She fulfilled her role, did a good job in the role she had as the First Lord, also helped by her daughters being there, even if they have even less to work with than Lady Dimitrescu herself. But just one of those things where I just don't see the idea of, oh, she should have been in the game way more, or that she should be a reoccurring villain on the scale of Wesker. I've seen that too. It's like, what? The funniest was seeing people getting upset that when Dead by Daylight had its first Resident Evil chapter, people were upset that it was Nemesis and not Lady Dimitrescu, even though one, licensing deals like this are made like years in advance, so there's no way could have accounted for that, and two, what you got against Nemesis? The thing I want to mention, because it's still very funny to me, is something to do with the Resident Evil franchise, and when it comes to the Umbrella Corporation, specifically how Resident Evil 2, it's up to us to check out Umbrella. Resident Evil 3, this time Umbrella's going down. Code Veronica, we have to take down Umbrella. And then Umbrella just dissipates off screen. It's one of those funny things I think about where they try to set up this entire villainous organization in Resident Evil, and then just Resident Evil 4 goes, oh, they went bankrupt off screen. Oh well. And just moves on to new villain groups, and does one of those hilarious things. Like, yeah, the aftermath of Umbrella is still felt throughout the franchise, but it is so funny to me how Umbrella itself just kind of dissipates off screen, despite having 3 games that have characters emphasize how they need to take down this entire organization. You also have people get disappointed when franchises have the same villain used a lot, but when they then start to tease the possibility of a new villain, just to then pull the rug and go, nope, sorry, same villain as before. Like, what's off my head would be Mega Man 4, where a whole entire thing of, oh, we got a new villain. Nope, it's still Wily. And it's one of those things of being disappointed. Again, people don't really care hugely when it comes to narrative. Oh, the Mega Man series. Also, Mega Man 9 makes a hilarious joke of Mega Man recounting every single time he beat Wily, so it's funny in that sense. But I did earlier mention Ganondorf from the Zelda series, and there are people who are disappointed that Twilight Princess does an amazing job at setting up a new villain, only to then still have Ganondorf be in the picture, and people wishing that wasn't the case. So it's one of those things where they tease a new villain and then go, nope, same villain as before kind of deal. Unless you're Mega Man X8, where, okay, granted Mega Man X7 did introduce a new villain group just to still have Sigma be the final antagonist, but X8 actually does introduce a new villain, and actually seems to cite being the start of no longer having Sigma, but since we never got X9 as a follow-up, we don't know how far this idea would have gone. Would they have backtracked? Would they have just immediately stopped? We don't really know, but that's one of the things I'm always interested about when it comes to Mega Man X8. This setup of a new villain who's not being used or manipulated by Sigma and fully has their own plan and schemes. We also have games where the protagonist of one game can be the antagonist of another. Alex Mercer, protagonist of the first prototype, becomes a villain in the sequel. I already mentioned Last of Us Part 2, but from Abby's perspective, Ellie would be the antagonist, so you can view that as Ellie becoming an antagonist per se. With the Tekken series, you have Kazuya, who's the protagonist of Tekken 1, but is then the antagonist of Tekken 2, with Heihachi becoming the protagonist of Tekken 2 in an interesting flip. Or you could just say Jin Kazama, because he is the protagonist of Tekken 3 through 5, and then becomes a villain in Tekken 6. So it's an interesting dynamic where you take a previous character or characters and flip their dynamic. Metal Gear Solid 2 even tries to set up that Raiden's mission is to go after the terrorists who are holding everyone hostage in Big Shell, but that the leader of the group is Solid Snake. Something that I didn't believe for a second when they said that, but hey, they tried. I could never find a source for this one, but I still want to mention it, is the claim that Mega Man X was supposed to be the villain of Mega Man Zero, but instead last minute it was changed to Copy X for the fear of tarnishing X's legacy, which, yeah, that would tarnish X's legacy, but it would have been some sort of character development for him aside from X7 really heightening up his pacifism. But no, instead it's Copy X, whether it was planned from the get-go or not, we don't know. All we know is that Mega Man Zero loves saying that X comes up with stupid ideas. One villain that I really want to mention, so here's your spoiler warning for the game Live Alive. And I played it, go play it, it's freaking awesome, but here's a spoiler bumper for Live Alive. Alrighty then, you good? You good? Okay, let's go. In Live Alive, you play through as several protagonists who all take place in a different time period. So you have many different stories being told with these characters going on their journey at different points of history. It's such a very cool idea, if it means there may be some protagonists you'll like more than others. Like, I'm just say this, didn't really care for the future storyline, but it is a cool thing. And one of the unlockable stories is the Middle Ages, with the protagonist being Orsted, a silent protagonist who is going on this journey because of the fact of he was praised as a humble knight and pretty much given the ability to marry the king's daughter, just immediately given an arranged marriage, alright. But the Lord of Darkness shows up, kidnaps her, so he goes on a quest in order to help save her and get rid of the Lord of Darkness. But this journey is not as it seems, with Orsted finding the Lord of Dark and killing him, only to find out he was just tricked into killing the king, now having Orsted labeled the Lord of Dark himself. With him now trying to find the real one, and he does do so, only to find out the actual Lord of Dark, or the new one, is his best friend Strabo. And after taking him out, the princess he was meant to marry, Alethea, shows up to reveal that, one, she didn't like the arranged marriage, which, to be honest, that's fair, very, very fair, but that by killing Strabo, that was the one she actually loved, and then kills herself because of this, now leaving Orsted having been portrayed by his best friend, branded as the Lord of Dark, and the only person who could have vouched for his innocence, Alethea, now also being dead, leaving Orsted basically hated by the world and having nothing left. All this tragedy ends up turning Orsted into this angry and bitter person, now becoming the actual new Lord of Dark, to the point where he is now the villain of Live Alive. Not the villain of this setting, the villain of the game itself, transcending history and time in order to enact his entire goal because of this tragedy. Even having a mode I believe exclusive to the Switch remake, well, on a remake, where you were actually able to play as the villains of each story and actually get their revenge on the heroes of each story, which is such a freaking cool way of not only handling a twist villain, but to also bring all these stories completely together. I kept seeing people say that Orsted's story, or the Middle Ages, was supposedly supposed to be boring on purpose and made the least interesting. No, even from his story alone, it was easily my favorite, and then just the twist at the end that he is now the villain of the game just makes it even better. On top of the fact that I mentioned he's a protagonist, this man gets filled with so much hate, he becomes a voiced character. That's how much anger he has. That's what I want to talk about when it comes to villains in games, and just how some people try to change the script in order to justify the villain being what they are and how they're actually not that bad, or try to excuse their actions when the story itself is not trying to, or how you can have great villains that people love in a game story, but they may not mesh well with being in a game because of the aspect of they're not a fighter, someone to even go against kind of thing. So they either need a proxy to do it for them, or they're just only a cutscene villain who, well, if they're in a cutscene, might as well not even exist in the context of the video game. Don't want to ramble about? Alright then, go out there, enjoy your favorite villains in games. Remember, the villains are also playable, or got playable content as well, since some games do go after the fact, include maybe DLC story, side story, whatever, to make the villain more playable. Alrighty then, so I gotta say, good day.
Video game villains are a mixed bag. Sometimes you like them, sometimes you hate them. Everybody has personal preference to their specific villains, and today I'm going to be talking about specific villains that were very integrated into my being. That's how much of an impact they made on me. So there are a lot of villains I like, however, I numbed it down to the very few that really made a significant impact on me. Not to lessen the other villains that I like, but in these ones that I'm going to mention, they really made a deep impact on me. For me, I want to talk about the villain in Dead Space 1 and 2. Now, I don't remember what the villain is in 3 because I know 1 and 2's story wraps up in 2, and 3 is something completely different. I don't remember, and I don't care to remember. All I remember was 3 had garbage DLC. 3 is like my least favorite of the trilogy, but 1 and 2 are my beloved ones, with 2 specifically being my favorite out of the trilogy. So in Dead Space 1 and 2, the main villain is Hallucination Nicole. Now, the main character you play as is an engineer called Isaac Clarke, and he only talked in 2, but then in Remake 1 they made him talk. But in original Vanilla 1 he didn't talk, he was silent. So the whole premise is essentially like an alien invasion. You find this marker and it transmits like these hallucination things into your mind and you start seeing things, but then there are also like actually real necromorphs and aliens that they convert and bring to life and stuff. So it's a mix of real and hallucination. And one of the big things about it is Isaac's main goal of finding his girlfriend, who named Nicole, who went aboard the Aegis 7. And he's there looking for her, hoping she's still alive. And when he encounters her, he genuinely believes that, okay, she made it, she's alive, I need to help her. Little does he know that she's been long gone, because the vid that she sent him cut off before it showed that she injected herself with something to kill herself. Which, you could say Kendra is technically the villain of this game, because she's the one that kind of like hid details and orchestrated it to where Isaac secluded the marker for her and her prophet or whatever it is. I kind of forgot, it's been a while. But I want to say Hallucination Nicole is the main villain. The reason why I say that is because she's a strong contender, even though it's all in Isaac's head, for Isaac doing what he does in the first game. And even though you fight like this giant alien boss at the end of the game, Nicole is still present in 2, so much so that she is the final boss in Dead Space 2. So for me personally, I'm going to say Hallucination Nicole was the big villain in 1 and 2. Kendra and that alien thing, I personally would count them as like secondary villains. So likewise, in 1, after you do all that, you know, Isaac thinks he's free, but then he looks to his right and you see Hallucination Nicole still there. She screams in Isaac's face, essentially rendering him unconscious, which leads to the events of Dead Space 2, where it all starts all over again in a completely different area. And at first they think Isaac is crazy, but then slowly they realize, okay, he's not crazy, this actually happened. Yeah, he's still seeing Hallucination Nicole, and Hallucination Nicole is after his ass. You go through all of this up until the very end, which is one of my favorite segment in the game, where you fight the final boss, which is Hallucination Nicole, where she gets you to kill that guy, I forgot the guy's name, the bald guy, and after you kill him, she embraces him, she's like, thank you, Isaac, now time to die. And then she warps him into, like, I guess his mind, where he sees her shadowy and the marker in the background. And I always love this part, especially that, like I mentioned in a previous video, I tried to 100% this game. So going through it on hardcore was a bitch and a half. And I remember, like, that final segment really did it for me, where she was like, yours is the only body we need to be absorbed. The makers must be absorbed. I might butcher that line, so forgive me. And then Isaac was like, the makers? You mean me? But Strauss said we could destroy the marker. And then she's like, not if we consume you first. And then he says my favorite line of all time in that game.
God damn it, I trusted you! Fuck you! And fuck your marker!
Oh my god, I unloaded with my rifle. I blasted the shit out of Hallucination Nicole, the hallucination necromorphs, and the marker inside his head. And after you do all that, you finally did it. You're free of the marker, you're free of Hallucination Nicole, it's over. The Hallucination Nicole in Dead Space 1s and 2 was definitely a strong contender for my favorite villain in this series. I felt it did such a profound impact on Isaac, and it really played with Isaac. Like, I felt bad for him. One thing I liked, which is a little nitpick, but it's my personal preference, is in Original 1, I believe it's Chapter 10. I know it's one of the 2-digit chapters. I can't remember specifically. It has been a while. I believe it's Chapter 10. I might be wrong. Where you enter one of the substations, and you're surrounded by a bunch of dead bodies who sacrificed themselves for whatever religious cult they were following in that game or whatever. And if you stand still and idle, you can actually hear Nicole singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, echoey and reverb inside that room. And it's so hauntingly beautiful. And it like fucks with Isaac. I just love it. And it's a goddamn shame that it's not there in Remake 1. It is a goddamn shame. Like, for me personally, I felt like that just drove the impact of what was going on even further. It drove it home. And the fact that it's not there in Remake 1 makes me sad. Not to say Remake 1 is bad. I also enjoyed Remake 1, but God, Original 1 just had that magnifique touch. Magnifique. Absolute cinema. Mass Effect has a plethora of villains. Now, the one I want to talk about that really left a significant impact on me the most would be Harbinger. Now, you could say, what about Saren or Sovereign from Mass Effect 1 or the Elusive Man from 2 and 3? However, I consider them to be secondary villains. Like, they may have been main in their respective games, like Saren/Sovereign was a main villain in 1, and Elusive Man, while not a main villain in 2, he's a main-ish villain in 3. I would consider them secondary, because Harbinger, I feel, was the strongest one that was like pulling the strings and orchestrating things behind the scene. Sovereign was just a messenger, while Harbinger is like the leader of all the Reapers, as we've been shown. So much so that when you do the suicide mission in 2, Harbinger releases control of the vessel he is currently housed in. And when you do the DLC mission called Arrival, you get to speak to Harbinger one last time, where he tells Shepard to prepare, that he's bringing his army and he's coming. And that leads into the events of 3, where you fight the entire Reaper invasion. And the Reapers are essentially, you know, full-blown eradicating everything, because it's supposed to be their 50,000-year cycle, but Shepard delayed it a little bit by not only beating Sovereign in 1, but also stopping it by, I believe it was a couple of months, I think, when you destroy the relay, which nearly eradicated the entire Batarian race. So 3 is like a very heavy game, because you're trying to get everybody to work together despite the differences and grievances and all that, and it's just crazy. But yeah, Harbinger is like the big bad, I felt, in all these 3 games, because he's the one orchestrating everything. And, you know, it's so much impactful that essentially you go you technically you go head on with him. You know, I say technically because even though he's there in the final mission when you take back Earth, all he does is shoot lasers. You don't really fight Harbinger, but the payoff is there because it's like, you know, this is the motherfucker that's been orchestrating everything. He's the leader of the Reapers, and I think he's even the one that does all this. You know, he's the one that orders the 50,000 year shit, which is a mixed bag because then if you proceed and you talk to the Star Child, which is the AI, tells it that that's the one that's been orchestrating everything and that essentially that's the one that oversees Harbinger. But then you also get the weird mixed bag thing because I don't know when they changed it, where you get the conflicting thing where Star Child says they made the Reapers, but then after that, when you do the Leviathan DLC, which shows the organic Reapers, well, I guess the original ones who made the Reapers in their image, they said they're the ones that made the Reapers. I think they fixed that later on the line. I don't know. Mass Effect 3 had kind of like a oof development history, and it was just a little oof at the end there. But regardless, Harbinger is what I felt to be the main villain of these three games, orchestrating everything like G-Man and Half-Life, like pulling the strings behind the scenes. And regardless of how people talk about and view 3, because I know I've said this before, I know 2 is the beloved, 2 is the fan favorite, and 3 is the oof one-ish. I still felt 3 personally for me was my favorite, and I still felt 3 had the most impact on it. I said it before and I'll say it again, 3 definitely made me cry a whole tsunami. Mass Effect trilogy as a whole is my absolute favorite, but yes, Harbinger, I felt, regardless of the other villains present in the game, I feel like Harbinger was a strong villain and a very strong contender that left a deep impact on me. Next I want to talk about is Dark Samus from Metroid Prime Trilogy. Now, I say trilogy as a whole because technically in the first game you fight the alien as Metroid Prime. And then when it tries to ensure its survival by taking Samus, it ends up taking her Phazon suit instead. And since it had Samus's DNA in it, it combined itself with Samus's DNA to give birth to Dark Samus, which you then proceed to fight in 2 and 3. But I'm going to say Dark Samus overall because essentially the Metroid Prime is Dark Samus, vice versa. That is Dark Samus throughout all 3 games. She's just given her proper Dark Samus form in 2 onward, while in 1 it's just that alien spider thing. So Dark Samus is a very strong contender. Like, Metroid has had a bunch of different villains and antagonists. Like Ridley, for example, would be the go-to. You know, Kraid, Mother Brain, etc. But for me, I want to focus specifically on Dark Samus because Dark Samus, for me, left such a profound impact. So in Metroid Prime 1, like I said, originally it's called Metroid Prime, and you fight it after getting into the impact crater with your Phazon suit, and it's in like this like suit, it's like the spider suit, and you fight it. You use all your different beams that you got throughout the game, your different abilities, you fight it. Eventually you wreck it so bad that it gets out of its suit and it's purely in its like organic tentacle squid-like oceanic form or whatever. That's a hell of a way to describe it, but that's my way of describing it. And you kill it essentially by shooting Phazon at it, the only weapon that can work against it because it's invulnerable for any of your weapons that you've used on it. And I love, like I said, I love how it was like on the verge of dying and then it tried to preserve itself by taking Samus. And I don't know if its intention was to take the suit. I think it was just trying to take Samus along with it so they can both die. But in a happy accident, it ended up taking her Phazon suit, excuse me. And she got out of the crater and she dipped. And in the post-credit scene, because I think you have to 100% the game, you get a cutscene where you see the pool of Phazon, and out of the Phazon comes the Phazon suit's hand. And when the hand turns over, you see the eye appear in the circle of the hand, signifying, okay, the Metroid Prime is still alive. It took Samus's Phazon suit, and now it's integrating itself into Samus's suit. Then you proceed to Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, where, yeah, you literally get confronted by Dark Samus in the beginning of the game. And I love how, like, creepy that is, where, like, Samus enters this new realm. Like, this is the first time being in the Dark Realm, learning about all this. And then she just sees, like, what could be, like, a clone of herself, you know, minus the whole fact that it's, like, dark and blue and etc. But, you know, essentially, imagine, like, being sucked into a dark world and you see, essentially, a figure of yourself. Anybody would be the freak the fuck out. But I like how Samus still tries to like put on her big boy pants and is like, all right, let's square up. But then Dark Samus is like, yeah, I don't think so, and breaks the crystal. And you know, her suit, she's in her base various suit. She's not obviously well equipped for the Dark World, so she's getting poisoned, and she has to throw herself back into the portal to get back into the regular world. And in true Metroid fashion, you lose all your items, etc. You have to regain them. Throughout the game, you're constantly fighting Dark Samus, and what I really want to highlight is at the end of the game and the final segment of Prime 2 Echoes. I love, which Nintendo, please remaster Prime 2. Oh my god, I would love to see all that juicy cutscenes in remaster HD like you did in Prime Remaster. Please, Nintendo, remaster Prime 2, I beg. But anyway, in the final scene, after you fight Dark Samus and you beat her, like, you see the helmet of Dark Samus is gone, and you see like the exoskeleton, I guess you call it, whatever. Basically, you see the face. It's like a fused face of how it looked when it was in Metroid Prime, and you know, the form it took of Samus wearing her suit. And I just like how after you beat it, Samus genuinely looks like she has the fear of God in her face. Like, she is so scared with the way that her eyes widen as Dark Samus tries to like crawl, like shamble over to her and to try to steal her light suit before Dark Samus disappears. And the whole process of Samus like getting out of the Dark Realm is so amazing, but I just love that moment. I just love that Dark Samus, even as Dark Samus was dying, quote unquote, you know, if you know, you know. Even though Dark Samus was on the verge of dying, it still tried to take Samus' suit again. And the fact that Samus was actually afraid, that just left such a profound impact on me. So you beat Prime 2, and then you get a cutscene. I don't remember how you get this cutscene. I never 100% of Prime 2. Prime 2 was a little more harder for me than Prime 1 was. So in the cutscene, it shows underneath the planet Aether, Dark Samus regenerating. And it's like, okay, so never mind, Dark Samus is still alive. And then we go to Prime 3. And in Prime 3, all bets are off. Dark Samus is maximum unhinged. Throughout the entire game, Dark Samus is not only causing chaos and wreaking havoc, but she also possesses Samus's friends, makes Samus fight her friends, and then after her friends get unpossessed, Dark Samus just kills all her friends. It's so sad. And then at the end of the fight, where Dark Samus takes possession of the main objectives you have to do in this game, the Aurora unit, after you beat the Aurora unit and like Dark Samus, also before Dark Samus goes in this Aurora unit, I forgot to mention there's one part where Dark Samus essentially splits herself in two. That shit amazed me. I was like, what? And after you beat Aurora Unit 313, I believe that's the correct number, that's when Dark Samus is finally defeated. I say that with an asterisk because I know Prime 4 is out. I have not played Prime 4. As far as we've seen in the trailers, Prime 4 is dealing with a different villain called Silex. I don't know if Dark Samus somehow makes an appearance in Prime 4. I don't know. I haven't played Prime 4 yet, so I'm not going to speak on Prime 4. Prime 3, however, you finally beat Dark Samus. And it's such a relief because, like, after that, like, you see Samus, like, looking out into the sky, and I believe the planet is called Elysium, and she's just reflecting and remembering everything that's happened, and, like, you know, you feel for Samus. Like, you know, excluding other M, Samus doesn't, oh, and I guess a little bit of fusion. Samus doesn't really show much emotion. She's mostly, like, you know, here to kick ass and stuff. And just to see her have, like, a moment of reflection, it's pretty cool. Like, you know, you can also argue she did have a moment of reflection in Prime 1, because after the Chozo Temple blew up, she, like, stared at it and closed her eyes and lowered her head to signify sadness. But I don't know, I feel like in Prime 3, it was more impactful, especially after everything she's witnessed and been through. Just her sitting on that, like, heavenly skyline, reflecting on everything that's been done before getting ready to leave again. Oh, man, that just left such a profound impact. Dark Samus's entire saga, 1 through 3, left a very profound impact on me, and I greatly enjoyed Prime Trilogy. I feel Dark Samus was a very, very strong villain in the Metroid series, personally. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Now, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Everybody has their personal preference. My personal preference as an individual, I like Genesis. Genesis is the better villain than Sephiroth. Now, once again, as I said before, and I'll say it again, I like original PS1 97 Sephiroth and Advent Children movie Sephiroth. I do not like remake Sephiroth. I feel like they are two completely different people. That's just my personal take on it. Regardless, I like Genesis. I felt Genesis was a much cooler villain. I like his little gimmick of reading poetry, literature, always reading his books and stuff. And he just looks cool. He just looks cool. I enjoyed the story of Crisis Core, as I've said in a previous video, but I don't really have much else, like, I don't really have a deep dive into Genesis as I've done the deep dive with these other villains. I just know that Genesis really left, like, an impact on me, and I greatly enjoyed Genesis. I liked when he appeared, I liked when he spoke, I liked when he recited his literature, I liked his entire fight. You know, I even liked when, like, they showed him off as a cameo in, like, Dirge of Cerberus. And I wish they did more with Genesis. And as I've also mentioned in a previous video before, you know, with the fact that the remake 7s kind of skewed from the original timeline, and we don't know what their plan is for the third one, if it's gonna like all connect back to the canon timeline or what they're gonna do. I'm just saying, since we're fucking around and doing whatever the hell we want, why not bring Genesis in 7-3? Let's bring Genesis. Come on, I want to see Cloud and the others interact with Genesis. Maybe Sephiroth and Genesis interact with each other again. Who the hell knows? I'd love to see Genesis be used again, but that's just me. Next, I want to talk about Half-Life 1. Now, Half-Life, all the Half-Lives have left a profound impact on me. Hell, all the Valve games have left a profound impact on me. But I mostly want to talk about Half-Life 1, because the main villain of this game is the G-Man. And he's the one that orchestrated the entire Black Mesa incident. He's the one that's running all the strings behind the scenes and all that. Now, here's the funny part. While I do mention that G-Man is the main villain of Half-Life, I also have to mention the final boss you find in this game, Zen alien called Nilanith. Forgive me, I'm probably butchering that to Kingdom Come. Nilanith. And the reason why I'm mentioning him, even though the main focus is on G-Man, is because Nilanith is not only a boss fight character, but he kind of talks to Freeman in a way. And he also tries to warn Freeman of the G-Man, which gives so much added mystery and lore to Half-Life. Because, you know, you're going through the motion and you're thinking, okay, you know, big bad alien, I'm gonna have to find him, I guess. All right, whatever, let's fight. And at the same time, while you're fighting him, he's also, like, subliminally talking to you, whether it be actually or in your mind where G-Man can't hear him. Still, and those lines, I remember, I did not really pick up on what he was saying, because when I first played it, to me, it just sounded like a bunch of muffledness. Maybe because I really didn't pay that much attention. But replaying it and then eventually looking at the clips on YouTube, hearing what he had to say, I was like, oh shit, this goes deeper than I thought. Some of my favorite lines that stood out to me was when he was like, "You are man, he is not man. For you he waits, for you. The last, I am the last. The truth, you can never know the truth. Their slaves, we are their slaves, we are." I absolutely love that. Like, that is so ominous what he's saying to Freeman. Especially that he's acknowledging, like, saying the G-Man is clearly not human. But the whole fact of them being slaves and that Nilanith is the last... What? You know, I was so smitten by the lore, by what he was saying to Freeman, and it's a shame that we had to end up killing Nilanith, which is what G-Man perfectly wanted, because literally after you do that, G-Man is like thanking you for helping him like open a bridge to Zen, where he's like, now Zen is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed. You know, and it's just crazy because, again, G-Man is the one manipulating and pulling the strings. He even orchestrated the fight against Nilanith. G-Man, like, planned all this shit from the start. And likewise, I know I'm going a little off course here, if you also played Opposing Force, even though G-Man orchestrated the whole thing, some anomalies happen, and, you know, he gets kind of pissed at that, because when he gets Corporal Shepard, the main character in Opposing Force, he's like, there are still a few loose ends to be tied up. The biggest embarrassment has been Black Mesa. And it's like, my guy, you're the one that orchestrated it, but you're also embarrassed about what happened here? That's interesting. But yeah, G-Man is the main antagonist of Half-Life and Opposing Force, and, you know, 2 and onward, I guess you could say as well. Not Blue Shift, because Blue Shift is with Barney, and G-Man does not give a fuck about Barney. He only had a strong interest in Freeman and Corporal Shepard. So, I'm just saying, G-Man made such a profound impact on me. I loved Half-Life's story in its entirety, you know, copium, but maybe one day we'll hopefully get a conclusion to the Half-Life saga. Maybe one day. And the last one I want to mention is Ultra Kill. Now, this one is a weird one because as far as I know, and as far as I've played, it doesn't technically, quote unquote, asterisk, it technically doesn't have a main villain. Technically, the one that they're alluding to that could be the main villain, you've already fought twice in this game. But so far, it's just comprised of you going to places and fighting different bosses. Now, I will be highlighting 3 specific individual bosses that really left a profound impact on me. There are multiple bosses in this game, and not to knock off the other ones, but to me, these 3 left such a strong impact on me, I have to talk about them. So, Ultra Kill basically is you are a angel robot in a sense, and humanity is long gone. Humanity is dead, extinct, whatever. And you are going through the depths of hell, mecha hell, some hell, and you basically need blood. And I'm pretty sure this is a play on Dante's Inferno. I could be wrong. I'm not well informed or well versed on Dante's Inferno, so I could be, you know, talking out my ass here, but that's just what I assume is happening. But where what I mostly do feel confident in talking about is how fast-paced action it is. It's first person, you know, you like shoot, jump, all that. Like, I think you could run on walls too. I don't know. I just liked how Ultra Kill was. Now, going back to what I was saying, the main thing I want to talk about is certain villains. So, first one I want to talk about is Gabriel, an angel. So, you fight Gabriel, not once, but twice. And throughout the game, it seems to be alluding that he might be the main boss of this game. But so far, you fought him twice and you've kicked his ass twice. And I don't know, I just liked it, especially that, you know, I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but an angel Gabriel, I'm like, wait, is that the angel Gabriel? Like, we're actually throwing biblical angels in here? I don't know, but I liked him. Like, your first introduction to him is like, you know, he talks a bunch, and then like, you see the flash of light, and he's like, behold the power of an angel, and you fight and you kick his ass, and then like, he's like stunned. He's like fucking stunned. He like gets back on the floor, he's like, what? How can this be? Bested by this thing? You insignificant fuck! This is not over! Then a flash of light happens and he disappears. He's like, may your woes be many and your days few. And then you fight him again, and he's like wondering how the hell is he still bested by a machine. He's wondering maybe he's not good enough or whatever. And in a cutscene or like a picture, whatever, like he's shown like going back to heaven or Mecha Heaven or wherever that place is, and he like decapitates the High Council's heads, and he holds the head up high covered in blood. And he's showcasing that he's about to rule heaven or Mecha Heaven or whatever that is. He's about to rule over and bring judgment down onto Earth or wherever this place is happening in. So that's why I'm like, it's alluding that he might be the main villain. I'm not sure. But Gabriel is definitely a strong contender. I really liked his lines, and I liked fighting him. The next one I want to talk about is Minos Prime. Now, this one is a second place contender for me because I really liked his entire character, and like, while it's short, I don't know, I just liked his dialogue and everything. Like, the dialogue is really what sold me for these people. So for Minos Prime, he comes down like in a blue orb, and he hits the ground, and like it bursts into, and it shows like his form, very tall, like a translucent figure. He's like, free at last, oh Gabriel, now dawns thy reckoning, for thy gore shall glisten the temples of man. Creature of steel, my gratitude upon thee for my freedom, but the crimes thy kind have committed against humanity are not forgotten, and thy punishment is death. And you find him, and like he you know, his character gives off like this like high and mighty, egotistical, like godlike figure, and I don't know, he was cool. And then after you beat him, he's like, forgive me, my children, for I have failed to bring you salvation from this cold, dark world. And then he screams and he floats up and just explodes. And I don't know, Minos Prime was definitely a second place strong contender for me. Now, my first place absolute love that I have for this villain in this game, King Sisyphus. I love this villain in this game. So you fight him, right? He like, you do a bunch of things, you fight him. I'm like glancing over things because I really want to talk about the main juice here, where he like he falls down. I'm sorry, I'm too excited. He falls down, fist to the ground. You see like a shockwave, and like he's like this giant motherfucker, giant yellow motherfucker. He looks at you. He's like, a visitor, indeed. I have slept long enough. The kingdom of heaven has long since forgotten my name, and I am eager to make them remember. However, the blood of Minos stains your hands, and I must admit, I'm curious about your skills, weapon. Therefore, before I tear down the cities and crush the armies of heaven, you shall do as an appetizer. Come forth, child of man, and die. And this motherfucker packs a punch. This was probably the hardest boss I had to fight in this game. Like, holy shit, he kept kicking my ass numerous times, but I greatly enjoyed this fight. And like, after you beat him with this, like, he was already cool enough for me from the get-go, but when you beat him, his final lines that he says is what solidified him for me as my all-time favorite villain in this game, where he, after you beat him, he goes,
concludes the life and times of King Sisyphus, a fitting end to an existence defined by futile struggle, doomed from the very start. And I don't regret a second of it.
He starts laughing maniacally as he floats up, spreads his arms out, and just explodes. That solidified him as my favorite villain in this game. The fact that he did not give a fuck. The fact that he gave zero fucks about what he's done, about who he is. I don't know, I loved it. I absolutely fucking loved it. That solidified him as my favorite for me. Ultra Kill thus far is a fucking good game, and I look forward to seeing where it goes from here.